All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Healthy Sex Podcast. We are here with a Mr. Sathiya Sam. Sathiya, we are so honored to have you with us today. This is episode 21, and this is our first episode that's virtual. So thank you for being willing to be a guinea pig with us, Sathiya. And we're going to be tackling the topic of pornography. So I've waited 20 plus episodes to tackle this on my podcast and decided it was time. It's an enormous, obviously, cultural nuance that people are dealing with in the day in and day out. And when I spent some time in prayer about this, I ended up coming across your content on social media, which is awesome. And I want people to hear all about that when you get a chance to share. But yeah, I just am super excited that you're willing to be a guest with us today, Sathiya, and super excited to learn from you and your expertise. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Carissa. And I love your podcast. I think it's so important that we have more people like you who are very spiritually equipped, but also academically informed. You have an amazing show and a really good thing here. So I'm just honored I get to be a part of it today.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Sathiya, I always like to have the guests start out by sharing a little bit about themselves, what it is you do, and then maybe how you got into the profession or the career path that you're in. So, do you feel comfortable kind of sharing a little bit about yourself to start us off?
Yeah, more than comfortable. I'm a porn addiction recovery specialist. I've been doing this work since 2018. This is not the career path I had dreamt of as a little boy. I had much bigger ambitions to become a pizza delivery boy, but God had other plans.
Okay.
I was exposed to pornography at a young age. I was 11 years old. It happened in the computer lab of my Christian school, and that's kind of where this whole journey begins. That was the start of a 15-year-long struggle with porn. And meanwhile, I was a pastor's kid, like I mentioned, Christian education, involved in the church, and just not really getting the answers I was looking for on how to walk in healthy sexuality, and certainly how to break free of sin in a way that wasn't just, hey, white knuckle it, pray more prayers, bounce the eyes when you're tempted, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I always purposed in my heart that if I could ever really figure out how to get free of pornography for real, then I would do everything in my power to help as many other people as possible get free as well. And so February 2016, I had my last relapse. And in December 2018, I launched Deep Clean, which is my organization now. We have a full team. I think we got 7 or 8 full-time. We just made a hire this week. So 8 full-time people. We've helped thousands of men around the world, about a 70% success rate. Our work has been featured on platforms that I never really thought it would be reached on, like, top ranking fitness podcasts and with like naturopathic medicines and doctors and all that kind of stuff. And so God's really taken the message, because I think he's getting the bride of Christ ready to be holy, because he's coming back for a spotless bride.
Amen.
And I think as well, society is waking up to the harmful effects of things like pornography that have become very socialized and normalized in our culture. So it's exciting times. It wasn't super exciting when we started, to be honest. It was hard work, but it's been amazing to get some traction the last couple of years in particular.
Dude, amazing. Okay, and cut. No, that was thank you.
I gave you the Coles notes, and then you can pull on, whatever threads you want to pull on. Yeah.
So when you and I first connected, we talked about how we want this to not be a shame-based podcast, right? So a lot of people are using pornography regularly, men and women. A lot of them maybe feel convicted. They don't feel great about it morally or ethically. So shame isn't working, and shame doesn't work in the church in terms of helping people get delivered and kind of walking in freedom. So you and I discussed some of the neuroscience and maybe kind of sharing some stats and just kind of making it relevant for what culture as a whole is dealing with right now. So I would love it, Sathiya, because you're much more up to date on this. This is your wheelhouse. If you could share with us just kind of some of the recent stats as far as like the prevalence, maybe percentage of the internet or internet downloads that relates to pornography, and then maybe we can hop into the science behind it. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. And at some point, we should talk about the whole shame thing as well. Obviously, this will not be a very shame-inducing conversation. That's the goal here. But we can talk a little bit about those who are dealing with shame, what they can do maybe a little later on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so at a broad level, yeah, it's estimated that about 35% of all internet traffic and internet downloads are pornographically related, which is a pretty big number when you think about how much goes on the internet these days. The top 3 ranking porn sites typically get more traffic than Amazon, Twitter, and Netflix combined.
Wow.
The porn industry is estimated to generate more revenue than the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the National Football League also combined.
No way.
And so, yeah, so and actually, that statistic does not include OnlyFans, which is
Really?
probably about a $20 billion company now, industry. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, this thing is huge, and it's not like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere, and what are we going to do about it? I don't mean it in a mongering way,
Right.
but I share the stats just to show when pornography is just as normal as using Netflix or
Right.
Twitter, this
Yes.
is clearly something societal. It has become deeply woven into everyday life for the everyday person.
Yep.
Um, there was a stat. I forget how this survey is a little bit older, Carissa, but it still gets the point across. They surveyed the youth of our day, Gen Z, and they wanted them to rank. What is like the worst thing that somebody could do, and they had a whole list of behaviors. And most people put not recycling as a worse offense than viewing pornography.
What?
Yeah.
All right, we can
So
chat about this. Okay.
So that should just give you an idea of the
Wow.
general cultural stance about this. People don't think it's a big deal. They
Right.
think it's harmless. It's become so normal, and early exposure is just the soup du jour that people really don't even bat an eyelash at something like pornography. Meanwhile, and we'll dive into the neuroscience in a minute here.
Yeah.
But it's become very apparent that pornography is incredibly destructive, especially to the developing brain. And case in point is when people reach adult years, they're prone to a plethora of issues. So you have 56% of divorce cases that cite their partner's porn use as the primary cause. Again, that's an isolated study. I think it's a little bit exaggerated.
Okay.
But it does get the point across that this is like leading to the point of divorce. It is causing all kinds of marital issues. In 2001, the rate of erectile dysfunction in men under the age of 40 was 5%, which is what you'd expect. We've all seen the Viagra commercials. This is kind of like an older demographic conversation. And now it's estimated that maybe as high as 30% or even 33% of men in that same contingent suffer from erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
And make no mistake, like you can follow the prevalence meters, like broadband internet 2001, okay, there's a spike. Smartphone 2007, and all of a sudden, like you can see that as we got more access to pornographic content online, so too did erectile dysfunction start to rise, pun not intended. So there's a lot of different dynamics at play here.
Sure.
And I know that you speak to a faith-based audience, and I obviously am a man of faith. In the church, what we're looking at is about 50% of pastors have watched porn in the last year.
Okay.
Probably about the stat, I believe it's 68% of men admit, and that's the key word, is they admit to watching pornography. So the number is actually higher. That's just the percentage that admit. In the church, I believe it's 35% of women that are also viewing pornography, and again, just don't have solutions. And the reason I know that they don't have solutions is because only 9% of local churches actually provide some sort of curriculum or course or something, some material beyond a Sunday service that people can get help specifically for pornography usage and sexual misbehavior. So that is the general landscape. I know I covered a lot of different facets there, but hopefully that gives you an idea.
So I kind of, when I was thinking about this podcast, I was thinking, so what the stats would suggest is the majority of listeners, more than not, are regularly viewing pornography. I mean, I remember, hearing a stat several years ago, and you can confirm this or not, like 80% of millennial males were regularly viewing porn. So like
millennial males, it's high 70s or around 80. Yeah.
The majority of my generation, the majority of guys in my generation are regularly viewing pornography, which we can talk about how that impacts relationships and intimacy in a little bit. But yeah, so the majority of people listening to this are going to be people that probably struggle more often than not. And I think, I don't know if you found this, I remember hearing years ago when I was getting trained to work with people in addiction, sex addiction and porn addiction, the stats amongst people in the church are the exact same. There's no difference for people in the church versus out of the church. Is that
no?
Right.
That is true. I would say the impact that porn has on marriages is less in the church than it is outside.
Okay.
So that's one statistic that is affected by the church positively. But as far as just viewership and consumption go, it's virtually the same.
Okay. So let's talk about the neuroscience, because to your point, a lot of people are like, what's the big deal? Like, I have couples that come in and say, hey, my partner and I want to bring porn into the bedroom. What do you think about that? Is that an issue? Blah, blah, blah. So if the majority of culture that's viewing and using pornography regularly doesn't see a problem with it, I think it's really wise for us to educate on like the neuroscience behind what actually happens with long-term use with porn. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a really important conversation. And I left this part out of my story, but where I actually really decided to quit pornography was while I was a university researcher. I was a high achieving academic, skipped a grade, honors degree by the time I was 20. My whole education was paid for by research grants and scholarship funding. And I really, the research has been, I'm so grateful God had me in that season, because the research has been such an important part of what we do now at Deep Clean and helping guys get free, because we don't just want to say like we said at the beginning, we don't just want to say porn is bad and you shouldn't
Right.
watch it.
Right.
The research is really starting to paint a pretty clear picture of actually just how it affects our brains and our bodies. So talking about the neuroscience, there's four major areas or major things that happen to the brain. The first is desensitization.
Okay.
So another word for this would be tolerance. It's that the things that you used to watch no longer give that same kind of hit or that excitement.
Mhm.
And so you either amplify the intensity of what you watch, or you seek novel content or eventually novel experiences. It goes beyond the screen. And a very extreme example, but it'll drive the point home, is, have you ever heard of Ted Bundy? Do you know who Ted Bundy is, Carissa?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, Ted Bundy, one of the world's most notorious serial killers, 29 documented abductions, rapes, and murders. This man committed atrocities,
Yep.
And he was executed as a result.
Yep.
The day before his execution, thousands of media requests. Obviously, it was a big story. He said yes to one of them. It was with Dr. James Dobson, A Focus on the Family, and.
Right.
And yeah, and in that interview, James Dobson asked him just point blank, "What do you think was the single greatest cause of you living a life that has, been so destructive?"
Wow.
And he didn't even hesitate to answer. He said, without the shadow of a doubt, this all started because of pornography.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and
Wow.
again, you kind of think this is pre-internet as well. So
Right.
you
This
kind
was
of think like how.
magazines,
I
videotape.
think it was, yeah, it was 89, I think. So we're
70s.
talking about VHS. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, don't quote me on the year there, but it was definitely like long before the personal computer and internet and all that stuff in the homes. So the point here is he's a great example. That's a great example of, if you watch enough of it, eventually you keep seeking more and more. And basically what he said is eventually it was just the thrill. He just had to find other ways to get his thrills. And this is sort of how he got it. And I'm not saying if you keep watching porn, you're going to become a serial killer.
Right.
But what I am saying is this is what desensitization looks like in the brain.
Yep.
So one more example, and again, just to really make sure the audience gets it. We have a lot of clients that are heterosexual Christian men that watch gay porn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, there's more to it than just the neuroscience, because you're a clinician and I know we could unpack a lot of that. But there is a neuroscientific component, which is that they eventually found this type of pornography because the other stuff they watched wasn't interesting.
Yep.
They needed some novelty. And this is what desensitization is. I think hopefully that gets the point across.
Yeah.
Okay. Second impact on the brain is sensitization. Okay. Sounds like the opposite. It is kind of, but it's a little bit different. Sensitization is when your brain starts to get cravings and cues from things that are not actually sexual and they're not actually related to pornography. Yep. And so the best example I can think of is, like, I think of the teacher that has to somehow like talk to 15-year-old boys, the grade 10 teacher, and they say something like, "Oh, when is so-and-so coming to class?" And they're like, "Haha, she said coming." Right? That's what sensitization. Yeah, you're sexualizing things. Exactly. That just they're really not related at all.
Totally.
And this is a really strong in people who watch a lot of pornography is you see somebody that reminds you of somebody that you watch, someone says something that triggers a scene, that kind of sensitization. Very, very prevalent.
Okay.
Tracking with me so far? Can keep going?
Awesome. I want to talk, but you're the expert, so rock and roll. Keep going.
Okay, all right. Okay, got it. Okay, next one is reduced stress response.
Uh-huh.
So this is actually something that they observe in alcoholics and drug abusers, and they were kind of surprised when they started doing neuroscience on porn usage, and they found that it's a very similar kind of idea. There's a reduced capacity for stress. They become more reactive. They don't have that same ability to just mitigate and manage stressors in life, whether that's job stress, relationship stress, or anything else.
Can I ask your
And
opinion on
yeah,
that, Cynthia?
yeah.
Because what I feel like we're kind of talking about is an addiction model, like
Mhm.
adrenaline and dopamine and like a hijacked reward system. Is that kind of what you're?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so do you think that has to do with immediate gratification, self-soothing, the inability to tolerate negative emotions? Is that kind of what we're talking about? Is that why there's a reduced stress capacity? What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I think so. I think it actually starts with the reward seeking, like hijacking the reward system and the pursuit of immediate gratification. I think that that's what ultimately reprioritizes the brain. That's where things start to kind of shift.
Okay.
And I think that the downstream effect is that you get this reduced stress response.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that actually leads into the fourth effect on the brain, which is hypofrontality.
Okay.
And so we're talking about reduced circulation to the brain or less activity in the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, where you make executive decisions, you can think long term, you can delay gratification. And obviously, if that persists long enough, you might even see structural changes to that part of the brain as well. And so this is why we have a contingent of clients who, in addition to pornography usage, they are making poor decisions financially, certainly a reduced emotional capacity in their relationships, no real vision or purpose for their life. And these are some of the symptoms of hypofrontality.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm just thinking out loud here. I know in my profession, we kind of try to look at what sets people up to be more vulnerable for pornography addiction or sex
Mm,
addiction, any kind of addiction. And I know with a lot of my clients that have untreated ADHD, they already have issues accessing their prefrontal cortex. So,
yes.
big picture, I'm wondering, is it like a chicken or an egg? Like what comes first? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I actually brought an ADHD specialist. Yeah, in her name's Dr. Tamara Rozier, and she wrote a book a couple of years ago called The ADHD Brain.
Hmm?
And the one thing she really helped our clients with, for anyone who's listening who maybe is kind of wondering that same question, is she said it's really helpful to ask: is pornography a stimulant or a relaxant? What purpose is it serving for me neurologically?
Okay.
Because if it's a stimulant, then what it means is you have to find other things in your life that are healthier that still stimulate you.
Okay.
But if it's a relaxant and you look for more stimulating solutions, you're going to make things worse because it's just going to create that need for more pornography because pornography is what relaxes you. So if it's serving as more of a relaxant for someone with the ADHD brain, then they just need to find out what are the things that help me relax, like getting in nature or calming music or meditation or whatever it is. So those are her 2 cents, and we found that to be pretty helpful with our clients that do have ADHD for
Okay.
sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I have clients that they use it to dissociate and disappear into fantasy,
Hmm.
which I'd love to chat with you about that in a sec. And then I have some people that they're bored and they want
Yes.
to stimulate them. And so
Yeah.
I know we talk about sexual arousal is the most powerful electric circuit in the brain. And so a lot of
Yes.
times people will sexualize things that aren't sexual when they're like ruminating on trauma. They'll start to pair arousal and masturbation and porn scenes and fantasies with certain things they're trying to, remediate in their own brain. Um,
Yes.
so I don't know. Anyways, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes with that, but that's good for the,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting what you just said because there's a guy that we've had on the podcast. His name is Dr. Doug Carpenter, and he's a sexual abuse specialist. And he said something that has still stuck with me to this day. But he said sexual stimulation is processed 20% faster in the body, I believe, than any other stimulation, and that must be why what you just said.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So if I keep like in Jay Stringer's book and
Hmm.
the other I know Doctor anyways the fantasy basically when I do fantasy assessments with clients, a lot of them have trauma they're trying to process, but if I can pair it with sexual arousal, Like I'll say, if you feel comfortable, what kind of porn do you find yourself watching? And a lot of people
Yeah.
are willing to do that, which is pretty brave and vulnerable. If they're willing to go there and they're willing to kind of do a deep dive, they'll go, oh, well, this actually has to do with trauma from childhood or trauma with my first boyfriend or girlfriend. And I felt rejected or I felt abandoned, and they're trying to reenact it. So
Mm,
my experience as a trauma therapist, as well as a sex therapist, is like, if people have unprocessed trauma, to his point, if you can pair it with arousal, it kind of keeps it up here, and I can
yeah.
somehow figure it out faster, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, that does make sense. And
Yeah.
I know for me that component, the fact that it's processed so much faster, is
Mhm.
also why it's such a problem that kids are getting exposed to porn at younger ages and in greater volumes with the smartphone and internet now and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
because they're developing bodies, right? They're developing sexually. So a lot of our clients, we don't work with a lot of Gen Z. Most of our clients are 25 to 45
Okay.
professional Christian men. That's kind of our sweet spot. That seems to be where we're the most effective.
Okay.
Most of them they weren't digital natives per se, but they kind of got into technology around the same time that online porn was starting to really proliferate.
Mhm.
And you can kind of see that, like, that simultaneously I'm developing sexually and also it's being fueled and informed by pornography, creates something that's very, very hard to kind of detach and dissociate and rewire neurologically.
Right. Okay, so Sathia, I probably should have started our whole thing like this. Do you have like an operational definition of what y'all consider pornography? Like, I think it's maybe, yeah, I think it'd be good for the listeners to consider what is porn. And I don't know if that's
Yeah.
objective according to each person, because like certain like YouTube things kind of feel like soft porn. Is it an image of somebody half naked on the internet or on the TV? Is it videos on my phone? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very contested question, as simple as it sounds.
Okay.
So there's one angle, which is the creator side of it, and then there's another angle, which is the consumer side.
Okay.
And basically the defining mark is arousal. So from a creator standpoint, it's any content that has been created with the purpose or the intent of arousal. That's pornographic.
Okay.
Um, on the consumer side of it, which is what I'm much more interested in, it would be any content that causes arousal in the consumer. That's where you would draw your line, because otherwise people get into semantics where it's like, yeah, well, I mean, yeah, sure, I'm following this model on Instagram, but like, it's not actually pornography. It's
They're
like,
not
well,
right.
yeah, exactly. And to be honest, even the Instagram models and stuff, like, most of that violates even the creator standpoint, because they're creating that content for your
Yes.
arousal anyways, right?
Yes.
It's a top of funnel kind of strategy, as it were.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think if it causes arousal, if it's content that causes arousal, that those are probably the great markers for us to say, yeah, that's pornography, no matter how you slice it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Thank you for that. I have a list of questions here, sir.
Fire away.
Fire away, he
These have
said.
been great so far.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm so thankful for you and your ministry. You are the jam. How are most people accessing pornography right now?
Mobile. 91% of pornography traffic is done on the phone, and the most prevalent times of the day are from 10 p.m. to midnight. So if people could just charge their phone outside of their bed, that's low hanging fruit to get the ball rolling in recovery.
Okay,
Yep.
so put up your phone by 9:30, homie. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, right on. Okay. Are there any themes that you notice to the porn that the majority of the public is consuming right now, or is that kind of all over the board?
So it definitely has evolved over time,
Mhm.
because there's always things that trend, like transgender porn has become a very trendy thing over the last couple of years
Okay.
for obvious reasons. But then I would say there are certain themes that just don't seem to go away, and they're all very incestual in a kind of interesting way. Stepmom and MILF, those are top five
Well,
keyword search terms pretty much year in, year out.
hmm.
And that goes back to what we were just discussing earlier, which is that if we pay attention to the content we consume and the temptations that we experience, what we find is that there's actually a lot of clues into why we're watching in the first place.
Yep.
And for many viewers, especially the male viewers, but not exclusively,
Yeah.
it does come back to early childhood experiences with a parent, often with a mom, not always. But that was my experience. Like I really had to work through things with my maternal relationship to actually experience freedom from pornography. If I
Oh,
wouldn't have done that, I'd still be addicted today. I'm almost certain of it.
oh
So
boy.
that's a really big one.
Thank you for sharing that. So can we go down that rabbit hole for a minute?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you and I have talked about Andrew Bauman. Spencer
Yes.
J. Stringer, they're kind of leading at the forefront along with you right now in the conversation around doing the deep dive work. Like, so for me as a sex therapist, okay, and where the Lord has led me is so much of sex is connected to our identity, to our attachment, to our family of origin stuff. It's connected to worship. And when, like you're kind of alluding to, when there's injury there, especially for men, it seems like they start to play that out in their sex life or with their
Mm,
sexuality. So where did I want to go with that? How many of the guys that you work with, I don't know if you can talk about this or not, Sathiya, like, do you find that the majority of people that are struggling that you're working with have attachment wounds, trauma with caregivers, issues with women? Does that kind of make sense?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, I'm honored that you'd lump me in with Dr. Bauman and Jay Sterner.
Absolutely.
I just had Dr. Bauman on my podcast. I do think those guys are leagues ahead. I really respect them and look up to them and have learned a lot from them over the years. What I would say to that is there's probably three major blocks that we observe in most of our clients as a general rule of thumb. One is the lack of emotional development. Two
Mm.
would be childhood trauma, unresolved trauma, and the third would be, a malformed identity, kind of a, yeah, limited belief systems. I mean, however you want to kind of slice that one, but faulty thinking that is ultimately driving a lot of their behavior that is surrounding their own sense of self. So those are the three big obstacles that we're guiding every single client through. Obviously, it's a little bit nuanced, but that is what deep clean is. It is in general a system meant to tackle these three main areas because this is where I just observed like guys seem to be the most hung up on this, and so we've centered and concentrated most of our efforts, around really resolving, emotional maturity, childhood trauma, and then faulty belief systems.
Okay. Which, yeah, I mean, the latter two absolutely impact the first one, right? If I have
Yeah.
trauma, most of us are stunted emotionally. And then,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. This is interesting. I don't know if you can speak to this. Some of my colleagues, I have a professor friend at Liberty University, Dr. John C. Thomas. We did our sex therapy training together.
Cool.
Talked about an interesting correlation between anger and lust.
Mm.
I don't
Hmm.
know. I would be curious to hear what you think about that. And I've been kind of mulling that over because I'm a female, but I work in the hormone space as well. So I know a lot of times
Oh, wow.
when guys get angry, they have a testosterone dump and they have adrenaline. And
Hmm.
testosterone spike and adrenaline is part of sexual arousal. So I'm
Mm.
curious to hear, like, I've been trying to figure out, like, what's the pairing? Because if I'm angry, my amygdala is activated, but what about that gets paired with lust and sexuality?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. So, yeah, I would agree that men tend to eroticize anger.
Oh,
That's very, very common.
okay.
So I have two angles to this.
Okay.
One is I believe, and maybe some listeners would disagree with me on this, but I believe that men generally have been told the only acceptable emotion for you to express outwardly is anger.
Okay.
And because our sexuality is so intertwined with our emotional well-being, I
Yes.
think that's why it ends up getting sexualized because it's actually the only emotion that we are allowed to express.
Mm.
And because it's the only one we're allowed to express and we are sexual beings and we start to want to express ourselves sexually as well, those two become very interlaced. And we have anger because of childhood trauma. We have anger because we get mistreated. We have anger because of all the things you and I were just talking about.
Yeah.
And without a proper framework or a proper role model even of here's how you handle anger in a way that's biblical and acceptable and healthy,
Healthy. Yeah.
then we end up eroticizing it. We don't know what else to do with it. So I think that's one angle. I think the other angle is and this is not my own research. This is based on a New Zealand researcher named Dr. Joe Robertson, who has observed that about 80% of mainstream pornography depicts violence and aggression towards the
Yeah.
woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And that's a very high number. Now, again, this is a chicken and the egg thing as well. Like,
Yeah.
did that get driven up because men were gravitating more towards that because they eroticized their anger?
Right.
Probably, right? And now that that's been driven up, it's mainstream. So now it is cyclical because kids are getting exposed at a young age to more intense porn that
Press.
has these yeah, this more aggressive kind of nature towards women and more, again, it gives them, it's going to tease that out of them a lot earlier and a lot more intensely. So that's my 2 cents on kind of what's going on there. Definitely we see that in our clients a lot, and that will be reflected in the kind of content that people want to consume as well.
Mm. Okay, so along those lines, Sathiya, I would love to hear what was your experience, and what do you see with the men that you work with in terms of the dehumanization and how it impacts your view towards women? Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah. So, and I'll actually like kind of, I'll just jump off what we were talking about. So I did say most men are allowed to show anger. That was not my experience. I grew up in a pastor's home to
Okay.
2 Indian immigrants. And so
Okay.
the Indian culture is be a good boy, get 90s, go become a
Be
doctor.
very
And
academic and brilliant. Mm-hmm.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And which, like I said, like I fit the stereotype to a T.
Yes.
Um, so for me, the general rule of thumb with emotions was suppress them. And because that's what I was taught to do with my emotions, that's also what I did with my sex drive and everything else. It was just
Shut it down.
stifle it, stuff it. Yeah, exactly. And then one day you'll get married and it's magically going to just go to 100 and be
Most
amazing.
people in the church have had that experience, unfortunately. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
bad
exactly.
until it's not. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was sort of my experience with my sexuality growing up. It was bad. It needed to be tamed, keep it at bay, all that kind of stuff. And so I really lived with just a lot of shame for feeling the things I felt, for having the desires that I had,
Mm-hmm.
everything that about me that was sexual. I just felt a degree of shame about, and that's what ultimately fueled my pornography usage. It was the shame about it. I felt bad about who I was, and then every time I watched porn, it kind of just reinforced that something was wrong with me and that I was bad.
Yeah.
And the things that you internalize about yourself will always be projected on the people around you.
So well said. Say that one more
And
time for the listener.
yeah, the things that you internalize, you will project onto others.
Yeah. So what you believe
And
about yourself, how you feel about yourself, you'll push that out and you'll put that on people around you.
yeah, and there's a biblical basis for this. In Matthew 22, Jesus was asked, "What's the greatest commandment?" And he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And the second greatest is like it. You are to love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Amen.
And so so when I found myself like I'm an adult now. I've given my life to the Lord. I've wrapped up things at university, at least for the time being, and I'm now like really trying to quit pornography. I'm very earnest in my recovery efforts, and I'm just realizing I'm sexualizing
Right.
everything. It's so hard for me to even just hold a conversation with a woman without fantasizing and jumping off into something that's totally inappropriate.
Yeah.
And it's easy to like the church has been like, like, oh, women need to not dress a certain way or, XYZ. We've
The
tried to pin on
responsibility
women.
for a man's fidelity and integrity is
Yeah.
totally put on females.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just nonsense. It's
That
it's
we
not true.
preach. We could have a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. We
Yeah.
should. Maybe I'll have you on mine and we can talk about that.
Let's do it.
But the second layer of that is it's easy to be like, oh, I'm objectifying that person. I shouldn't objectify that, or I shouldn't be looking at them that way, or whatever. And what we don't realize is the reason we're looking at them that way is because that's how we view ourselves.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
You can't objectify somebody else unless you first objectified yourself. It's
Interesting.
impossible. Yeah, it's impossible.
Okay.
And so I think for me, that was a huge part of my processing was realizing this is not about the objectification of women
Yeah.
as much as it's about I have actually lost my own humanity. And to tie all of this together,
Wow.
that's why developing emotional maturity changed everything for me.
Amen.
Because number one, it gave me permission to embrace my sexuality and my emotions and everything that God had given me in all its glory.
Yeah.
And that was a huge part of it. So that was very de-shaming. It was very liberating. But the second step is I started to build an identity, like we were saying. That's kind of the third pillar of our recovery system.
Yes.
And in building that value for self and realizing I'm valuable and I'm a person, I'm a human
Worth
made
more
in
than
God's
my
image.
sexual parts and performance abilities. I have more to offer than my genitalia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In understanding my true value, I was then able to look at a man or a woman
Yeah.
and see them through that same lens. And so I think this is often lost. This is why we often reduce the conversation around sexual integrity to internet filters and bouncing the eyes and white knuckling it is because we actually don't realize just the extent of how much at an internal level individually is driving so much of our sexual views and our sexual behavior. So that was a big thing for me, in addition to, like I said, working through the relationship with my mom, which I'd be happy to get more into that if that's helpful as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind to share, I think that'd be a powerful part of your testimony.
Yeah. So I was probably about 3.5 years. No, that's not true. I was 4.5 years into recovery, and I was doing quite well. I was an associate pastor. I was just getting ready to release my debut worship album, and I had a really bad relapse. And I'd been doing well in that area. I had been clean for maybe a year at that point, something like that.
Yeah.
So I remember the Holy Spirit actually told me, you need to call your dad, which was not instinct for me. I'll just put it that way. That's not something I would have done. Sure. But I called my dad, and I was feeling really ashamed because I'm in a ministry position, but I'm also launching this worship album and getting ready to go tour around a little bit and promote it. So I was just talking to my dad, and my dad just gave me the assurance like, hey, we're going to figure this out, but just focus on launching your album, and, we'll keep talking, kind of thing. Okay. So that conversation eventually leads to me going to see a specialist. It's probably a few months later.
Okay.
And the specialist, it would have been someone like you, Carissa, just very well equipped, very balanced, knows how to make people feel safe, and started asking me about my relationship with my mom. And I was just like, no way, like we don't need to go there, like the walls are up. Yeah. And he just very patiently, very astutely, just poking and kind of fishing around. And we eventually get there. I open up, and it surfaces that I've basically lived most of my life up until that point feeling neglected by my mom. Oh. Now, my mom did not physically neglect me. This is emotional neglect. Yeah. And me realizing that between Indian culture, my mom has her own story and own things she's been through. Sure. She didn't really express a lot of affection. I knew she loved me, but I didn't get the words of affirmation. I didn't get the physical touch, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, nurture. And the nurture. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm just what's that? Sorry?
Feminine nurture.
Feminine nurture. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So important for our development.
Absolutely.
And because I grew up with that void, I naturally sought out things like pornography to satisfy it. And that's why, I talked about the top two terms like stepmom and MILF always being in the top 5. Yeah. That was me to a T. That was textbook. And it makes sense. I was living out and watching out all of the trauma I had experienced when I was young. Yeah. And I remember this was a guy who was very spiritually equipped. Again, that's why he reminds me of you, because he was well informed, but also very spiritual. And he just said, like, do you want to forgive your mom? And wow. I just said, yeah, I do. I knew I was so earnest about recovery, and there were no hard feelings. I just had never really connected the dots before. So I said, yeah, I want to forgive her. Wow. And most of my recovery, Carissa, was I got a little bit better every day, and I would look back 6 months, or I'd look back a year, and I'd be like, wow, I've really gotten somewhere, Yeah. But the day that I forgave my mom, I walked out of that guy's office a completely different person. Wow. And I knew I was different. Something felt different, but I knew I was different because the next day, this temptation came along, and it was a familiar temptation, and it was normally a 7 or an 8 out of 10, and it was a 2. Like, it was there, but it barely registered. It left just as quickly as it came.
Not as much pull.
Yeah. No, exactly. The pull was not there. And that's when I really knew like something had really shifted in my heart. So I think that's why the stuff we're talking about is no joke. It's so important. It's hard for believers sometimes to see how this is all connected to something that's just like, it's just pornography or it's just sex. But I feel like my story is just such a good example of how intertwined these things can really be.
Thank you so much for being willing to share that, sir. That's
absolutely.
God bless you. I can tell you've done your work because you can share it. You own it. You're confident. Wow. God bless you. Yeah. So in my field of studying trauma, we talk about the most damaging form of trauma for a human being is actually neglect. I would
Mm.
say it's not a competition. Compete, trauma is trauma, but neglect long term, especially in human relationships and the human brain, causes the most damage.
Mm.
And so a lot of the
That's interesting.
yeah. So a lot of the folks I've worked with over the years, when they get in their story, yeah, we had a roof over our head or we had food on the table. When it talks about, when you ask them, did you feel seen? Did you feel known? Did people care about your world, your reality, what you were dealing with, what you wanted, what you're upset about, emotional attunement? Most people are like, huh? What?
Right.
So my big
Yeah.
concern right now, to your point earlier, is because of our phones and electronics and the whole distraction of our culture, is we are still perpetuating neglect of one another.
Mm.
So wrapped up in our electronics, we're still perpetuating neglect. It just looks different, and so people are turning to hypersexualization to get their emotional needs met. It just has a
Wow.
different face to it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. One of my mentors said, he said it differently, but he said abandonment is the root of all roots.
Reach. Yes,
Yeah.
we're not meant to be alone and abandoned and unknown. Yeah.
No, and the interesting thing about the smartphone and tech is I think in addition to, you think of like a negligent parent maybe who's on their phone a little bit more, not attuned to their kid as a result or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the obvious one, but I think the reality is, at least with my client base for sure, a lot of them were using the phone to neglect ourselves, right? We're ignoring the
There you
uncomfortable
go.
emotions, we're
Beautiful.
ignoring the
Yep.
stressors in our life, the conflicts that need resolution,
Got it.
and the phone is that coping mechanism. And I often say, like, if porn is digital cocaine,
Yes.
then
Yeah.
tech is its gateway drug, right? That's kind of where it all starts.
Absolutely. Dopamine Nation. I'm sure you've read that book or heard of it.
Yeah, with Anna Lemke. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The brain gets hijacked and I can't stop scrolling when I need to go deal with what's actually bothering me.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
that is the neurological basis of addiction. It's
Yes.
not even that you're addicted to the substance or the process or the behavior. It's that you're addicted to what's next. It's always about the next thing, right? If you looked at any
Mhm.
Yeah, if you looked at any porn addict when they're watching, I guarantee you they have multiple tabs opened up because
Sure.
they're thinking about the next thing, right? It's I'm gonna watch this, then I'm gonna watch that. It's
Yep.
always what's next, what's next. And when you're not watching, you're thinking about when you're gonna watch next. Like that's the thing that in our neurobiology becomes so hard to break out of is that next cycle.
Yes.
And the tech engineers know that the best, right? You scroll on
Mhm.
Instagram
Yeah.
and there's just always the next thing, or you swipe through stories and there's always the next, always the
Tiny,
next.
flashy, riveting, exciting, naked.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next thing.
The human body is beautiful. So over here, naked, naked. Yeah.
Yes,
Totally. Yeah.
exactly.
Sathiya, we could talk for 3 hours, but we have like just a few minutes left. So I want to just practically, can you chat a little bit about your experience and or what you see with your clients, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, the impact of porn on intimacy, like
Yes.
sexual intimacy. Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two big angles to this from a male perspective. So one we already talked about, which is just the physical performance issue. You have guys who really are just not having their bodies perform optimally in the bedroom because of pornography. And erectile dysfunction is the extreme version of it, but its subsidiaries would be things like premature ejaculation,
Yeah.
delayed ejaculation,
Anxiety based.
performance anxiety. Yeah, exactly. All of that is a byproduct of porn usage for sure.
Okay.
And then there's also, I guess, another one you could embed in there would be like the insecurity, just body insecurity and body shame and that kind of stuff. In fact, there was actually a study, it's just a one-off study, but it showed that men who viewed pornography were more likely to develop eating disorders because of the body dysmorphia that comes from viewing pornography. So,
Yeah, it used to be that all of us ladies felt super insecure. In fact, I don't know if
right.
you ever heard about the study down in South Carolina where they did the eye scanners in the computers and it was heterosexual porn and they guessed you could look at the male face, the female face, the male body and the female body, and they tracked where the eyes of both genders look first. And when
Yes.
polled, and I even ask this question when I get to speak on it, I'll say, where do you I'll ask the ladies, where do you think the guys look first? And they'll say the female body.
The body, yeah.
Uh-huh. And then they'll say, where do you think, and then I'll ask the ladies, where do you think the women, and everyone says female body. And the study was the men looked at the woman's face first.
Yeah. And then I think the male's genitalia second, right?
I don't remember. I just remember
Okay.
learning from that study that men are looking in their fantasy or in their whatever they're trying to, they want to know that she's engaged. They want to feel wanted. They want to feel
Mhm.
desired. And so most
Yes.
women are like, what? Because all of us ladies have had dysmorphia because of where men are looking, right? Like by God's design, we don't want to share where your vision is. We want you to only see us and be delighted in just us. We don't want you to saying, oh, she's hot. She's hot.
Yeah.
She's hot. Like that's just counterintuitive for how God's designed the feminine.
Yes.
You're saying now you're saying men are developing deep insecurity and a sense of
Yes.
dysmorphia because of the porn.
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
100%. Because guys see very unnatural specimens that they
Yes.
just
Yeah.
know they don't match up to or compare to.
Yep.
And especially like for me, I was a young kid and I didn't know any different. So I just assumed, wow, this is what men are supposed to look like. This is what they're supposed to be able to do. I don't match either of those criteria. Something must be wrong with my body.
Yeah.
It creates those insecurities. I'm pretty sure that study, it was the female's face first, like you said. I
Oh,
believe it was the male genitalia second.
interesting. Okay.
And that's actually why, if you look at most mainstream porn, the last scene always involves those two things. That's
Wow.
what keeps them coming back for more. I'm pretty sure I
Okay.
read that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it was the same study. That was a really interesting one. To go back to your question,
Yes, sir.
the question was about how it affects things in the bedroom. So
Yeah. Mhm.
the physical side of it, as we've just discussed, and
Yep.
then there's another study. We didn't even really get into attachment too much in this conversation, but there was a study that showed men who viewed pornography had reduced activity in their vasopressin and their oxytocin pathways, which obviously two pathways very important for emotional bonding, empathy, attachment, everything that we're discussing.
Jealousy and
So
possessive, right? Is that how you understand basic? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mine. This is mine. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so what happens is when you get this reduced emotional capacity, is it actually, surprise, surprise, if you don't connect emotionally, you're not really going to connect sexually either. And so that's what's happening with a lot of our guys is it's like, I know I watch too much pornography, but I'm also not getting enough sex. And it's like, well, actually those two things are way more related than you think.
Right.
And I think the linking piece often is the emotional capacity, the ability to empathize and to form meaningful emotional connections with another person that pornography addicts, and not even in addicts, but just people who watch pornography a lot, lose. And so I think those are the two big stumbling blocks that are created in the bedroom. Is you don't have any emotional connection, and so the sex life is affected. The partner doesn't
Yeah.
want to engage sexually, or if
Sure.
they do, the level of sexual experience is limited as a result.
Yeah.
And then I think you have the other physical things like we talked about.
Yes. I don't know if this term, I call it embodied, being fully present,
Mm.
being fully in yourself and being fully emotionally available for yourself and
Hmm.
your partner. My experience has been porn kind of because of the desensitization and the dehumanization and the detachment. Like porn is very detaching for people with their own sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when they show up in the bedroom, it's like they're not attached to themselves and they're not attaching to their partner because sex is about an act or about the high or about the erotic versus the sensuality, the energy, the passion, the connection. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally agree. I would say I even experienced that myself. When I got married and my wife and I obviously were sexually active once we got married.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had been clean of porn for, I'm just trying to get the number right, but I think 3 years, if I'm doing the math right. I'd been clean for 3 years, and still just observe like when I was engaging sexually, not being fully present, having that dissociative tendency,
Yeah.
and a layer deeper is I was actually just very selfish. Like I was just thinking about what
Right.
I'm going to get.
Yes.
Had totally prioritized her
Yeah.
and her getting what she wanted,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
really like violating what I would say is actually godly biblical sex, which is that you come in with a servant heart, willing
Amen.
to prioritize the other one above yourself, knowing that if you do that, you will probably get everything that you need and more.
Yes.
And those are things that I had to rewire and retrain my brain to do because pornography sent a very different message.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I would even mention too that, Sathya, a lot of the people I see when their partners, like let's say the husband's using porn or their male partner's using porn, women feel like this performance anxiety, even if
Mm,
their male partner's like, I want you to come or I want you to finish. Oftentimes with the pornified mindset, it's still about his arousal or his ego. And like, it's not from a healthy perspective of I genuinely want to enjoy you and I want you to enjoy yourself. It's still
yeah.
about that pornified mindset of
100%.
and
Have
chasing.
you
Mhm.
have you heard of Sheila Ray Gregoire?
I have.
Familiar with her?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so she talks about the orgasm gap, right? Is it
Uh,
the 48-point orgasm gap? I think it is. Of 95% of couples said that when they had sex, the male would orgasm, but I think it was only 47% said that the female would orgasm as well.
mhm.
So you have this huge gap, and that's not just because of pornography. Unfortunately, there's other
Mhm.
mindsets and belief systems that have been pervasive in the church that fuel
Yes.
that.
Yep.
But yeah, you get these gaps, and porn definitely exacerbates it. Porn tells you it's all about you and what you need, getting your needs met,
Yep.
you getting what you want, and you using whatever means you need to. In this case, your wife to make that happen.
Yeah. Do you think porn makes people lazy lovers?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What about-
yeah. I mean, it's to be honest, I don't even like the word use of the word lovers. That's why I hesitated for a second. Definitely makes them lazy.
Yeah.
And but it you.
Not much effort to get pleasure when you're watching porn, right?
Yeah, 100%. I would just say you're not much of a lover at all if
Okay.
porn's been affecting your brain,
Yeah.
right? I mean, truly,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because
I have to
you're
learn.
there, you're living out your trauma, you're
Yeah.
there to get your fill, you've dissociated. Like it's
Yeah.
not if we're talking about like the biblical definition of love, there's not a lot about it that really lines up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you gosh. I seriously, we could talk for 2 more hours, Sathiya.
I
Thank
know,
you
this has been
so
good.
much for all of this. Okay, so sir, I would love if you'd share a little bit about if people are interested in learning more about you, your ministry, if
Mhm.
they're interested in working with you. Can you share some of those details with us?
Yeah, for sure. I always recommend people just go check out my content first, just to see if you like it before you really consider working with us. Man Within is the podcast that we have over 900 episodes on there. Lots of content for people to peruse, and we answer listener questions. We interview experts like yourself. We do all that kind of stuff on there. So that's a great place. If people want to learn my specific system and be like, okay, what would it look like to work with you? Follow me on Instagram, DM me book, and I will send you a copy of my book that explains my whole system. And like I said, if you see the content, you like what you see, then absolutely, I'd love to work with you. But I think that'd be a good place for anyone in your audience to start.
Okay. And so I'll share it on my end, but just so as the listeners, because this will be on Apple and Spotify and a few other platforms, what if they're looking you up, what's the actual address, Sathiya?
Yeah, podcast is Man Within, or you can just go to my website, sathiyasam.com, and find the podcast link there at the top. And then my Instagram handle is Sathiya Me Sam. So you might need to put that one in the show notes. It's not an easy name to spell,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's how people can find me.
Okay. So to wrap us up, Sathiya, for people who are genuinely interested in getting unstuck, what would be your mantle or your call to action for people if they were interested in like, hey, I'm really stuck. This isn't working the way I thought it would. It's actually causing more harm than good. What would kind of be your parting words for listeners today?
Most people that are at this point have probably done something before to quit. And human tendency is I need to go back and do the thing I've done before, but do it better or do it bigger or do it harder. And what I would say is if you reach this point, you probably need to do something you've never done before. I think Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. And so I would encourage the viewer, the listener, do something you've never done before, whether that means you try journaling for the first time, whether that means that you maybe go and watch a training on recovery, or you read a book, whatever it is that you do something you've never done before. And you will probably get exponentially better results than what you're getting so far.
Awesome. Well, this connection is evidence that the internet can be used for good and for divine purposes. So thank you so much for being willing to come on as a guest today, Sathiya. God bless you. I'm just thankful to have you as part of my podcast and for your ministry, and the Lord bless you and what you're up to. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. You got a good thing going on here.